You're listening to the Whole Hog Football Podcast, sponsored by Landers Toyota of Northwest Arkansas. Every Monday through Friday during the Razorbacks football training camp, bringing you the latest news, position analysis, and more. Here's your hosts, Matt Jones and Scotty Bordelon.
Arkansas went through its first day of Cincinnati game prep on Thursday. The Razorbacks will go through a mock game on Friday night. Then they'll go through a light practice on Saturday, and then next week it's game week. The Razorbacks in Cincinnati in just 8 days at Razorback Stadium. Matt Jones with Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph of Whole Hog Sports. And Sam Pittman spoke to the media on Thursday night. You know, like we've said a number of times on this podcast, it's always insightful whenever Pittman speaks to the media. It feels like you learn something every time that you didn't know about going into it. Scotty, you heard him. Just what were some of your thoughts about what he had to say on Thursday?
Yeah, the several times I've been out of practice this week, I think the main thing that you're looking for, like right now, because I think the first impressions stage of camp obviously has gone away, you know, with the first day of prep being here. You had about 2.5 weeks to assess guys and just figure out which guys look, you know, kind of physically impressive, which guys might be jumping in to be able to contribute and that kind of thing. So now you're just kind of looking to see, you're looking to lay eyes on guys just to see, you know, what their availability is and that kind of thing. And so Monday, you know, several guys got back, like Cade Renfro, Dominique Johnson, Chase Lowry were back at practice. And, you know, you keep going through the week and, you know, things happen, and, you know, things can potentially happen when you're as physical as Arkansas is, even when they're not, you know, fully live. And Brady Latham and Jaden Hazelwood have been a couple of guys that haven't been out at practice, at least when when reporters are, you know, allowed in to view a few periods. And I think Sam said that he really thinks that Latham and Hazelwood are both going to be back for the Cincinnati game. He's not positive on the day that they might get back next week, but the goal is to get them back no later than Monday. Going to take a wait and see approach. But Sam said that he thinks Brady Latham could probably practice right now. We're not really sure what is going on with him, but Tyke Crawford gave us a little bit of a hint the other day when he was in the interview room, and, you know, he was answering a question about, do you think you're, you know, how ready do you feel? How confident are you that you can step in and play, you know, in a moment's notice? And he said, you know, it doesn't matter if Brady's hurt, you know, I'm ready to jump in and help out. So that was a little bit of a hint that he gave us there. Not sure what's going on with Hazelwood, but we've mentioned in earlier podcasts that he dealt with a shoulder in the spring. Don't know if it's that or not, but he hasn't been around. I felt like Sam said, I don't know, quite a bit, just because I'm sure there is, you know, some uncertainty. And I think the official word normally comes from like the trainer, right? Whether a guy's available to be on the field. And Dominique Johnson, I think, has been looking good. The days he's been out there, hasn't been, you know, swelling on that knee that he had repaired when he got injured in the Outback Bowl. He's been doing individual drills and things like that. But Sam said he's not sure if Dominique's going to be ready for Cincinnati. I think that's kind of been the case for a while. Like Sam said, I think at the beginning of camp, that he was questionable for that game. Don't want to rush him back. And he's also, you know, super confident in Tyke Crawford being able to step in and play. I think Tyke, if you listen to his interview the other day, he is more than confident in himself to be able to contribute.
I think the big news there is that Latham is going to be available on next Saturday for the Cincinnati game. And he's one of those players, you know, I mean, obviously you want him in practice, but he's been around this long enough that if he misses a couple of practices, I don't think it's that big of a deal for a player of his caliber. I mean, the SEC preseason coaches all SEC team came out the other day. He's third team all SEC on that team. This is a player who really knows the lay of the land.
Yeah, it is. I mean, he's been around for a while too. And the thing is, like, when we don't see them on the practice field, that doesn't mean that they're not doing anything, right? Like, they could be in the indoor getting individual work, like, you know, kind of like Marcus Henderson has for most of the fall. He's been kind of off to the side of the offensive line when they've been doing position group drills. So just because we don't see Brady doesn't mean that he's not, you know, in the facility doing something, and I would think that he would be doing something unless it's a serious injury. But the way that Sam's been talking, like he could practice right now, I don't think that's the case. I think it is a positive, obviously, like you said, that Sam thinks he can play, because if you go into that first game with your offensive line a little bit out of whack, as opposed to what you were maybe expecting a week ago, you got to obviously play well in that game, and then you'll be working Brady back in, and then possibly Tykees back down. So you don't want to, maybe create any, I don't want to say friction, but something going on with that offensive line going into week 2.
As we said, Sam Pittman spoke on Thursday after practice. Here are some highlights from what he had to say.
We're beat up a little bit, so we wanted to buy another day. Hopefully we can get some guys back. So tomorrow will be our mock game, where it's situations and having the guys understand how we stretch on game day, and just alignment on the sidelines, where they're going to sit, take all the anxiety out of game day, running through the A, all those type things. With that will be some situations like backed up punting, kickoff after a safety, things of that nature that we have to be prepared for as well, but not a lot of physicality at all tomorrow. And then that way we're going to come back Saturday in full pads on a Tuesday practice. So hopefully we can get some of the guys that are a little beat up, dinged up back by that time.
Crawford and Lewis, they obviously didn't seem to figure in the rotation, but you spent time, energy, money recruiting those guys. Now, a week before the opener, they go into the portal. How do you feel about that? And the fact guys leave so late, in the process.
I feel like if they don't want to be here, they need to get in the portal, and I have no problem with it. If you don't like it at the University of Arkansas, you need to go someplace else, and that's what the portal's for. And we're not for everybody. You got to practice, and you got to, go to weights. You got to do, it's hard. If you don't like it, then that's who we are. We're not changing, and go in the portal. Would I like it to be earlier, where we could keep our scholarship and all that kind of stuff? Absolutely, because the guys that are on the team are earning their scholarship, but that's the rules. But I really feel that way, and that's anybody. If we do our stuff the way we do it, and I think we're more than fair with kids and how we handle them, how we talk to them, and for whatever reason, whether it be depth chart, it's too hard, whatever reason it may be, they choose to go in the portal, we wish them luck and we'll help them. We're not for everybody. So that's how I feel about it.
That was Arkansas coach Sam Pittman on Thursday after practice. Mentioned that earlier this week, the SEC coaches announced their preseason All-SEC team. Now, earlier in the offseason, back in July at SEC Media Days, the media members who attended Media Days in Atlanta, they voted on an All-SEC team. The coaches came out with theirs earlier this week. There were 4 Razorbacks on those teams. You had, as we mentioned earlier, Brady Latham was on the 3rd team. And then there were 3 first-teamers. Ricky Stromberg was on there. Also, Jalen Catalon was on there. They don't break down the secondary by cornerbacks or safeties or anything like that. You just have 4 defensive backs on the team. And Catalon was one of 5 on the first team because of a tie. And then Bumper Pool was also on the first team at linebacker. So probably no surprise that Arkansas had the players that they had on there. Was there anybody that wasn't on there, Scotty, that you thought might be overlooked? I guess Cam Little might be a name that stands out to me.
Yeah, for sure. Like that's when I saw that those coaches teams got released, I just kept looking for Cam. He's 20 out of 24 last year. What was he, freshman All-America? Just super consistent. But I think that just tells you about the depth of special teams in this league and just the talent at place kicking. Because I think every program in the league understands the importance of a solid place kicker. I don't think anybody in the SEC understands that more than Nick Saban. Just after all the things that he's dealt with place kickers in the past, that was a little bit surprising. Maybe I would think, if he has another, pretty productive season. He'll be a guy that's on all the preseason teams next year. He could probably land on some postseason teams this year. I think it's super interesting that Brady Latham is a guy that's been, on some preseason all SEC teams. He's a guy that, you don't, outside of Ricky Stromberg and maybe Tykees Crawford and Dalton Wagner. And, we talked about Crawford and Wagner a whole lot this preseason because we feel like if Wagner's not able to play, then Crawford will step in. So those guys have kind of been talked about as a pair. And then Ricky is just, super important, kind of the quarterback of the line, dealt with a little bit of injury. But, outside of that, and maybe Luke Jones, there's not just a ton of individual talk about, some of these offensive linemen, but I think Brady, if you ask Sam, he would probably be a guy that, he thinks has a really, really good future in the game. I think Bo Limmer is another guy too. He's obviously, I think, one of the strongest guys on the team, and he's found a home there. I think at right guard, just as long as everybody else on the line is healthy. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see some other guys on the offensive line outside of Ricky Stromberg get some recognition. That's pretty good for Brady.
Something that interests me about these teams is that Arkansas led the Power Five in rushing last year, and neither of their two backs are on it, or KJ Jefferson, who was their top rusher, also didn't make it either of the three teams as a quarterback. And I think we did our little roundtable. One of the questions was, where does KJ Jefferson rank in the SEC? I think I put him number 3, right behind Bryce Young, obviously 1, Hendon Hooker 2, and then I had KJ at 3, so he would have been on my third team, I guess.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are super high on Will Levis at Kentucky. Probably, I honestly don't know what else KJ could have done last year to maybe land on one of these teams. Obviously, it's not life or death by landing on a preseason team. Like, that doesn't honestly matter one bit. But I think that we have, since we cover Arkansas and KJ so closely, kind of under a microscope, that we understand everything that he's, capable of, responsible for, and just, how much of a role that he has on this team. And I don't think that I think sometimes we can be guilty of thinking just a little bit too closely. Like, Kentucky, Arkansas hasn't played Kentucky in a minute. And so we're obviously not paying super close attention to Kentucky and understanding fully what Will Levis can do. But I think if coaches in the league, had to pick between KJ and Will Levis for one game for their life, maybe, I think they'd probably go with KJ. I just think that he's capable of so much more than Will Levis, but apparently there's a lot of hype around him. And Kentucky's a program that's kind of turning itself around. So, yeah, I was kind of surprised that KJ wasn't on there. I don't think that Spencer Rattler was named to that either. And Will Rogers, I think Will Rogers is one of the more experienced quarterbacks in the league too. And he, obviously puts up numbers largely because of the scheme that he's in, but he's a good quarterback too. So yeah, I was a little bit surprised that KJ didn't get in there, maybe a third team.
The opposite is true. You're talking about, we don't see some of these teams that Arkansas doesn't play. The opposite is true when it comes to coaches. I mean, you've only got 8 SEC head coaches who have watched KJ Jefferson in person outside of, his own coach. And then you might throw in, South Carolina's Shane Beamer in there, because I'm sure they've scouted him a good bit this offseason. He just might be flying under the radar of some of these coaches just because they haven't had to prepare for him. And I think a lot of time on these preseason teams, I think the coaches revert back to, number one, who are the best returning players for sure. But then I think some of it too is about, who were the players that were, recruited the most. And you see Alabama with 19 players on this, Georgia with 10 players. I'll tell you where I think players can get overlooked are the transfers, because at the end of the year, there's going to be 2 or 3 or 5 or however many transfers that are on that postseason all SEC team, players who they may have not gotten to play a whole lot at their old school, or maybe they did, but it's going to be players who have gone into a new situation and it's going to be a good fit for them. So, I mean, you think about guys at Arkansas, we think Jaden Hazelwood and Matt Landers have the potential to have really good years. Is it going to be all conference season? I don't know. Drew Sanders would be one. who I think would probably fit into that billing too. I really get the feeling that Sanders is going to have a big year playing in this new scheme. I just think they really like him there. And then you think about players who, like a Trey Knox. Okay, I think Trey Knox could have a really good year at tight end. Again, is it going to be good enough to be all SEC? I don't know, but I think it's going to be a lot better than we've ever seen Trey Knox before. And that's what makes these preseason teams so hard to pick, is that you just really don't know who the players are who have made so much improvement. And I'm not talking about just at Arkansas, it's at every school.
Yeah, for sure. And I think some of this too, just going back to coaches filling out these ballots, like I think some of them just kind of put big names on there and just call it good because they kind of understand how, I don't want to call them pointless, but they are kind of meaningless. Like preseason accolades don't really mean much. But I think Drew Sanders is, yeah, I agree with you, Matt. I think he's an interesting name. And I think there's honestly some thought that he could be Arkansas's best linebacker. Like if you ranked Arkansas's linebackers right now, it would be pretty tough for me to decide on who that top guy is, because I think Drew, just based on what he's shown in the spring and everything that we heard about him, really good pass rusher, can really run. I mean, he chased down Malik Hornsby, for God's sakes, running to a sideline in the spring. Don't know if he'd made the tackle because you can't hit quarterbacks in football practice these days. But yeah, I think he's a guy that he can, with a big year playing with Bumper, I think, he's definitely got a chance to land on one of those teams when it's all said and done.
Isn't it amazing when you see a defender run down somebody really fast?
It's crazy.
Laterally to the sideline.
Yeah, it was
Scotty,
insane.
You're going to know exactly which play I'm talking about. What was the play last year where you knew that Jordan Davis, the Georgia defensive tackle, was really legit?
Probably when he swallowed Traylon Smith whole.
Ran him down to the sideline.
Toward the sideline. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean,
yeah, we saw
play.
We saw Derek Brown do that same thing to Traylon Smith, I think the year before, or Rakeem Boyd the year before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just, when guys are different, you can tell that they're different right away.
Yeah, that's the play. That was the play with Jordan Davis that stuck out to me all year last year. I mean, you see a guy that big. I mean, what's he, as big as a 3-story house or something, chasing down a running back to the sideline?
Pretty close.
Incredible. The Whole Hog Football Podcast is sponsored by Landers Toyota of Northwest Arkansas, where you always get the best service and best buying experience in the state.
For all your automotive needs, shop Landers Toyota NWA in Rogers, where we guarantee you the best buying experience and best service after the sale in Arkansas. Landers Toyota NWA in Rogers.
WholeHogSports.com has the largest, most experienced staff of reporters covering sports in Arkansas. Football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. You'll find it at WholeHogSports.com. The website includes up-to-minute news, daily commentaries, and award-winning photography from the staffs of Hogs Illustrated and the Democrat Gazette. For subscriptions, call 1-800-757-6277. That's 1-800-757-6277. Or visit us online today. WholeHogSports.com.
Want more coverage of your home team? Download the Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Check out the Fan Zone and get up-to-the-minute videos, podcasts, and features on football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. Search for Whole Hog Sports on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire at home. And take it with you on the go by downloading it for your mobile device in your app store. The Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Get it today.
Welcome back to the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
This is our last of our preseason football podcast. Beginning next week, we're going to move to 2 podcasts per week, except for next week, it's only going to be 1 podcast. The way we do our podcast during the season is that we'll have a podcast recapping a game, and then we'll have a podcast previewing a game. Obviously, there's no Razorback game this weekend, so we won't have a podcast to recap, but we will have a preview podcast that ought to be live by next Thursday. And then we'll start with 2 podcasts a week following the Cincinnati game that week between Cincinnati and South Carolina. Also want to remind you that on September the 7th, Hunter Yurachek is going to speak to the Hogs Illustrated Sports Club. We had Sam Pittman there this week, and that was a great time. You can find information about the Yurachek Luncheon by going to our sister website, nwadealpiggy.com. That's NWADEAL PIGGY.com. Hunter Yurachek on September 7th at the Hogs Illustrated Sports Club. We meet at the Hilton Garden Inn in Fayetteville. That's just off of Weddington Drive. The doors open at 11:45 a.m. The lunch begins at noon, and we'll have you out of there by about 1 o'clock. It's always a great time to hear these speakers come in and just kind of, present their message in a unique way while you're enjoying a plate of food. So we're looking forward to hearing Hunter Yurachek. We've also announced that Casey Dick, the former Arkansas quarterback, is going to be the week after that on a Tuesday, September 13th. And we've timed that out so that he can talk during the week that Bobby Petrino comes to Fayetteville. And so Casey Dick will share some stories, I'm sure, about Bobby Petrino. He can also talk about Isaiah Satania, Manny Powell. He's got some former players on the UA roster. Looking forward to hosting Casey Dick. Again, nwadealpiggy.com for all that information on the Hogs Illustrated Sports Club. All right, the college football season begins this weekend. Now, the Razorbacks aren't playing, but there are a handful of games this week. There's some FCS games, but there's also some FBS games. I guess the game that stands out to most people is going on in Ireland on Saturday when Nebraska plays Northwestern. I don't quite understand why those two teams are playing there, but they are. There's also an SEC game this week. Vanderbilt is going to Hawaii. Would you rather go to Hawaii or Ireland to cover a football game?
I'd probably rather do what people do in Ireland, which is drink in Hawaii and watch Vanderbilt Hawaii. I would probably like to go to that game. I'm excited that football is back. I'm not sure that one is going to that one's really going to resonate with me just a whole lot, but I'm just going to be glad I'll have it on the TV. But I would imagine that game's late, right? Late kick with it being in Hawaii.
Vanderbilt, Hawaii. Oh yeah. That's the late kick. I think it's on CBS Sportsnet. Yeah,
it's a Saturday. Kids wear me out. I'm just not sure that I'll be able to make it very far into that game, but I think Vanderbilt's favored in that game. I could be wrong.
Wouldn't surprise me.
But yeah, I think Clark Lee, I didn't really know what to make of his speech at SEC Media Days. I think he set a world record for longest opening statement at Media Days, and I'm just not sure that it's going to go real well for Vanderbilt this year. But playing a team like Hawaii in week one, that it's not like you're opening with the biggest, baddest opponent in week one. So we'll see. I think that's a trip that you got to make the most of too, right? Like fly out there, let the kids enjoy themselves a little bit, and then get down to business and try to get back on the mainland with a win.
That was a filibuster by Clark Lee, by the way, at SEC Media Days. And it actually wasn't that bad of an idea, because I always feel bad for the Vanderbilt coach when they get up there, because outside of Bob Holt, nobody asks him any questions. It feels like.
Yeah, that's exactly right, for sure.
So I mean, in order to fill your 30 minutes,
telling him. Yeah, his SID is probably telling him to, just everything that you pitched in your interviews with the administration and stuff. You regurgitate that to all the reporters.
Didn't he say something about Vanderbilt becoming like one of the top programs in college football?
Yeah, I think he said it was going to become the best program in college football. All right.
Chad Morris also said he came here to win championships, and that didn't really happen. So take it with a grain of salt.
Hey, speaking of former Arkansas coaches, Brett Bielema is going to have a team on Saturday as well. Wyoming goes to Illinois. That's a 2 o'clock kickoff on the Big Ten Network. Check that. That's a 3 o'clock kickoff on Big Ten Network. So there you go. Those are really the only games I think worth watching. I mean, some of the other ones this weekend, you've got Austin Peay, Western Kentucky, Idaho State, UNLV, UConn, Utah State. Yeah, it's you got some interesting teams that are in action, but the teams that they're playing aren't going to be very good matchups, I don't think. Florida State hosts Duquesne, and North Carolina hosts Florida A&M. So I can't imagine that those games will be very, very interesting. We looked through, though, the SEC schedule, and it is interesting to look past this weekend at just the games that we're interested in, and we're going to keep it at kind of the first part of the season, but you look opening weekend, and it's been a long time, I think, since you could say that maybe outside of the 2020 COVID season when the schedule was all weird, and Arkansas played Georgia to open. But in terms of, like this normal Labor Day weekend schedule, opening weekend, when you could say that Arkansas was playing one of the really marquee games. But I mean, you look throughout the SEC that weekend, yeah, you've got Georgia, Oregon. I don't know that there's any other SEC game that I'd want to see more than Arkansas, Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Florida plays Utah. That's an interesting game to me. Billy Napier going into his first year there, and I think there's been a few questions just maybe about the way that he's recruited to that program. Like Florida school, I remember when I was growing up, man, like if you played with Florida on NCAA football in a dynasty, like you were getting like every 5-star kid imaginable, because that's kind of the brand that Florida had at that time. And I think they've just kind of been going through it in recent years, like not enjoying the amount of success that they've become accustomed to. But they're playing a Utah team week 1 that will smack you in the mouth and never apologize for it. Like that's a really good team that they're playing in week 1. That's super interesting to me. And then I think a game that everybody probably is going to be keeping tabs on is South Carolina and Georgia State. South Carolina's coming in the next week, or coming in to Arkansas in week 2. I think Georgia State last year gave Auburn a game, right? Like that. I think their game at Auburn came down to maybe the last minute.
I think that's right.
I think maybe I can't remember who it was Auburn's quarterback last year. I think he threw a touchdown pass maybe in the last minute of that game. So that's I'm not saying that's going to be a good game, but you might just keep tabs on that just to see who's standing out for South Carolina. Something else stands out. I mean, LSU and Florida State, that game's in New Orleans. Probably be a little bit of a party scene there if I had to guess. Just kind of curious to see what LSU is going to look like too with Brian Kelly taking over there.
With LSU and Florida State, I don't know that game really lives up to what those two teams thought it might when they scheduled this, because both of them have not been as good the last couple of years. In Florida State, they lost the game to Jacksonville State last year. Of course, we know what LSU's been through. Another game I think that's kind of interesting is you've got Memphis and Mississippi State. It seems like when Memphis plays those Mississippi schools, they always give them a run for their money, and I'm sure it's a huge game for them. And a game, I'll tell you, that I think could be maybe an upset, if you will. Week 1 is Missouri plays Louisiana Tech, and I just feel like Louisiana Tech might give Missouri a game. Don't know why I think that. I just think they might. So with Florida and Utah, I feel like the intrigue there is maybe more on the Utah side because of how well they did last year. I think I read that they've got their highest preseason ranking that they've ever had in program history. Of course, played in the Rose Bowl a year ago. It's so weird when you talk about Florida and Florida State, and they're just not quite Florida and Florida State that we're used to. I don't know if that makes college football any better when they are. You hear people talk about, well, college football is better when Notre Dame is good, or college football is better when Texas is good, or I don't know if that's the case, and I don't know if it's the case with Florida and Florida State. And of course, all of these blue blood teams, they can't all be good, or they can't all be great, at least simultaneously. I don't know how it worked that way. Week 2, Arkansas plays South Carolina. I think that's a really interesting matchup that week. Some of the other ones that week, you do have some SEC games. For instance, Florida plays Kentucky. One that I think is kind of interesting is Tennessee goes to Pittsburgh. The game that everybody's going to talk about that week, as long as Texas doesn't lose week 1, is Alabama goes to Austin. You'll get is the Texas back talk before that game, I'm sure. Mississippi State goes to Arizona. But again, Arkansas, South Carolina, I think it holds its own, and especially because it's one of the 2 SEC versus SEC games that week.
I think if Chad Morris was still working at Auburn, I think a lot of people would pick San Jose State to beat Auburn in week 2, just for jokes, I think. But I think Missouri, Kansas State on September 10th is kind of an interesting game, I guess you could say, kind of a Big 12 throwback type game. But yeah, Missouri's got to get through Louisiana Tech first. Like Tom will tell you firsthand, Louisiana Tech is normally a pretty tough, rugged team. It seems like they always play some pretty fun games, but other than that, like Texas A&M is playing App State, Ole Miss is playing UCA. Mississippi State has to go to Arizona, so there's a kind of a semi-interesting road game for an SEC team to play early on in the season. I don't think Arizona is probably going to be that good. But yeah, Alabama and Texas and Arkansas, South Carolina. And then I think those are the two headliners. And I remember watching Tennessee and Pitt last year. I think that's when I kind of found out that Kenny Pickett was as good as he was when he went to Tennessee and played so well. And then Jordan Addison's not at Pitt anymore, went to USC. But I think that Tennessee-Pittsburgh game would add a little bit of intrigue.
Tennessee-Pittsburgh, it's the Johnny Majors matchup. Of course, he coached both of those teams. Really well known for that. Week 3, this is really the only week, I think, in the first 5 weeks where Arkansas doesn't play what should be one of the real games to watch nationally. They play A&M in week 4, they play Alabama in week 5, and we'll talk about how those games kind of rack up with the rest of the league. But you still got Missouri State, and of course there's the intrigue there because of the Bobby Petrino angle. The other games that week in the SEC, A&M goes to Miami, Miami goes to A&M, Ole Miss goes to Georgia Tech. You've got some SEC matchups that week, Mississippi State, LSU, an SEC game that I'm always intrigued by, South Carolina and Georgia. And if you listen to the talking heads, I guess would we qualify as talking heads, by the way? I think we do.
If we do one of these every day during the preseason, we become that.
I think we have become talking heads, unfortunately. But you hear people talk throughout the offseason that they think South Carolina might challenge Georgia in the SEC East. I don't know if I buy that. But that's a matchup that I always love seeing early in the season. I think that's a great rivalry game over on the eastern side. Penn State goes to Auburn that week. Again, Arkansas, Missouri State, there's intrigue locally because of Petrino, but it's really the only game in the first 5 weeks that probably isn't going to get a lot of national headlines. Unless Missouri State wins, and then you'll be hearing quite a bit about it.
Yeah, I think a super interesting game during week 3 is Auburn, Penn State. You remember Auburn, went to Penn State last year, and I think that game came down to the wire. And this is I know it's only year 2 for Brian Harsin, but that dude's got to start winning some pretty meaningful big games. And play Mercer in week 1, San Jose State in week 2. So you could be blowing both of those teams out, 50-0, but everybody's going to be thinking about Penn State coming to Auburn. And I think if Auburn doesn't find a way to win that game, I think there's going to be a lot of early pressure this season on Brian Harsin. I know I got an email from, I think, sportsbetting.ag the other day, and they the subject of the email was odds for the first coach hired or fired in each conference. And Brian Harsin has minus 1,000 odds, and all the other coaches in the league are at least plus 300, plus 400. So I think he's the early favorite right now to get shown the door, of the SEC head coaches. So I think if he doesn't make an early statement this year, things are going to get really tough for him.
In week 4, Arkansas plays A&M in Arlington. I think we all are pretty well aware that game is going to move away from Arlington after the 2024 season when the contract runs out there. It would be really surprising, just based on the comments that the ADs have made at both schools, if that game is renewed there past 2024. But what's interesting to me is that because it is in Arlington, there is this locked in date for it every year, and it's usually in week 4. And it's kind of become the game to watch, in my opinion, in week 4 every year. It used to be Tennessee, Florida. When Tennessee, Florida would play that week, you can go ahead and clear the rest of the schedule because Tennessee, Florida is going to be the SEC marquee game. And obviously it's not that case anymore. There's not a bigger game in the league than Arkansas A&M that day. And I would be really surprised if CBS doesn't pick up that game for its 2:30 game of the week.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there. I mean, I'm just looking at some of these other games, like Ole Miss is playing Tulsa, Mississippi State, Bowling Green, LSU, New Mexico. I think this is kind of of the first 4 weeks, you like to throw in a pretty competitive game that I think a lot of people are going to pay attention to. That'll really test you in the first few weeks. I think week 4 is one of the last weeks where these SEC teams are kind of getting their bye games in, so to speak. So you got Kent State, Georgia, And I guess Vanderbilt and Alabama is obviously not a bye game for Alabama, but and that I don't know if that game should be on TV at all. You might
More
just
like
need
a
to avert.
BYE by, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of what it feels like.
Yeah, because Alabama's getting ready to travel to Arkansas that week, so they're probably just wanting to get in and out as quick as they can.
Yeah, we'll know in about 2 weeks if CBS is going to pick up that Arkansas A&M game, but I just would be really surprised if they don't. Well, and we haven't talked about this on this podcast. I'm really sad to see the SEC going away from CBS. I think the production value that CBS brings to the games is totally unmatched from a college football perspective, and CBS does such a good job in its production of so many different events, whether it be the NFL, the Masters, the NCAA tournament, obviously the SEC game of the week. I think the SEC is going to miss that CBS treatment that has been given to the game of the week. I know that they're excited about some of the possibilities that they can have in being able to have more long range schedules by having basically monopolized all of their TV inventory to ESPN and ABC. But I think they're going to miss that CBS deal. And last year, obviously we were at the game in Arlington, but you come back and you watch the highlights or you watch the replay, and there's something about seeing that, hearing the CBS song hit and just seeing the CBS treatment and that crowd in Arlington, and it gives it a really big feel to that game.
Yeah, for sure. I think Arkansas winning last year had a little bit to do with that, because the storyline in that series obviously had been, how A&M had controlled it for nearly a decade, right? And that was a really, really emotional win for Sam. I think, he kind of, not that he hadn't left his mark on the program early in his tenure, but that was a really, really big win. And I think that there's obviously significance there with him, because he wants all those trophies in his trophy case so he can keep taking pics, sitting in a throne with all of his trophies sitting around him. And obviously recruiting plays a big part in that game too for Arkansas. Just to go to the Dallas area, just and showcase your brand and showcase the just kind of the I don't know, just kind of the mentality that your program has, and just be able to put that on a national stage, and one of the premier stadiums in the country. It's a really big deal. But you're right, Matt, on the CBS part. Like I've seen, I think, kind of teaser trailers for what the CBS Sports kind of like the pregame intro is going to look like, and it just that music comes on and your heart kind of spikes, because you feel like what's coming, and then they show highlights from teams from a different conference, and it just doesn't hit the same. And honestly, I miss Vern Lundquist too. Like, I know people like to bag on Vern Lundquist just because, I felt like a lot of people feel like he was, maybe aging out a little bit in that role, but he was kind of the voice of my Saturdays growing up, listening to him call those mid-afternoon games. I just missed that so much. And then, for another conference to be kind of the showcase games on CBS, it's going to be a lot different. It's going to be pretty weird.
Yeah, I think so too. CBS just gives such a like I said, CBS just gives a game such a big feeling. I was reading Andy Staples in The Athletic earlier this week, and he was, or maybe it was last week, and he was writing about all these changes that are coming with the SEC going away from the CBS, Big Ten coming in. Of course, people identify that theme song with the SEC because the SEC has been pretty much the only thing that's been on CBS for quite some time. But that song predated the SEC on CBS, and Andy Staples clinched his story. He said, whatever ABC and ESPN decide to do, they better come up with one heck of a theme song to replace what CBS has with the SEC when the SEC games go there. Finally, October 1st, Arkansas plays Alabama. That's a great weekend of football, by the way. There are a lot of all SEC matchups that week. Every SEC West team plays another SEC team. There's 3 SEC West versus SEC West matchups. Arkansas, Alabama, of course, being one of those. And then there are 2 other SEC games that week. Ole Miss plays Kentucky and Georgia plays Missouri. A lot of people are excited about the possibility of what Arkansas, Alabama might be. That was the weekend last year where you kind of looked at it long range and you said Arkansas, Georgia could potentially be something big if Arkansas can beat Texas, if they can beat A&M. They did. Game day came to Athens. A lot of people think that game day might be eyeing Fayetteville on October 1st. They haven't been here for a game since 2006, that Tennessee game between Arkansas and Tennessee that Darren McFadden starred in.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility for game day to come. I mean, obviously Arkansas's got 3 tests on their schedule before Alabama comes. I think that's just kind of the nature of the beast with the schedule that they have. I think a lot of it obviously depends on what Arkansas looks like in the first 2 games. If they handle business against Missouri State, and obviously, the A&M game is always on a pretty big platform, always draws a lot of eyeballs. But I just the thing to me, like when I see Alabama appear on the schedule, I think that tells me that Arkansas is kind of in the meat of its toughest part of its schedule, right? Because you got to play A&M, who's top 10 in the preseason. Alabama, I think, is probably the odds-on favorite to win it all. And then, after Alabama, you got 2 pretty tough road games, going to Mississippi State and then BYU. And then, thankfully, I think probably in Sam Pittman's estimation, they get a bye week. But yeah, Arkansas's favorite, their schedule early on in the season is pretty tough. But I think if they, make strides like they think they're going to, they'll be able to handle themselves pretty well in these early tests. And, it'd be pretty cool for game day to come around. But I think that's probably the last thing on Sam's mind right now. He's just, wanting to make sure his guys are ready for the first few tests that they have.
On the game day angle, it wouldn't surprise me to see game day in Arlington for the Arkansas A&M game. If both
I think
of those
that'd probably be the week to do it, because I don't think you want to wait and see what Arkansas is going to do. You should probably just strike when the iron's hot.
I don't know what the other games are outside of the SEC on those weeks. Obviously, there's other big games, and they don't want to be an SEC centric show, and I certainly understand that. I've always thought that scene in Arlington is a really cool scene. I think the people who bash that game are the people who don't go to it. If you go to Arlington, it's a really cool environment outside the stadium on those game days. The problem, I guess, if there is one, ends up when those games are at 11 a.m. and you don't have the party scene outside beforehand, but you get it later in the day. It's a really neat scene outside AT&T Stadium. I understand why they want that series to go back to campus. I mean, Kyle Field has been renovated. Razorback Stadium has been renovated since they began that series with the Cowboys down in Texas. But it's a neat deal. I think that it's kind of an underrated matchup, and I'm talking about in terms of the actual game, in terms of the atmosphere around AT&T Stadium on game day.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I've gone down in the past to some of those games, like when they were the primetime game, late at night, and it's just like it is a party scene the entire day in those like there's nothing but parking lots around that stadium, and just it's territory for everybody to set up their tailgate. And then obviously I think one of the things that makes it really unique is like you can walk around the stadium and you can kind of see how A&M operates on a game day, and then you can walk around to the other side and kind of see how Arkansas operates, and then you get inside the stadium and you kind of see what makes both of those fan bases so unique. Obviously A&M brings in their their cadets.
Yeah.
And I mean, and they're constantly making noise. And then on the other side, I mean, Arkansas is obviously doing their thing too. I just think you get a really good, especially from where we sit, you're able to see everything kind of from a bird's eye view. And I think it's, most of the time it's split right down the middle. Like A&M's got half the stadium, Arkansas's got the other half. And it's a really unique inside the stadium atmosphere too, because I mean, Arkansas scores, you see half the stadium go crazy, and then the other side's groaning, and vice versa. But that's a super underrated game to go to, I think.
They need to get the stadium filled up, and I understand why they don't. The prices are kind of high for that game, and I think the luster's kind of worn off a little bit. But you see Georgia, Florida play a neutral site game, Texas OU plays a neutral site game. They fill up those stadiums. Of course, there's a lot more history in those rivalries. That's really the only downfall or the downside, I think, to Arkansas A&M is that the stadium doesn't quite fill up like it first did when there was a newness to that game there in Arlington.
I
By the
think
way,
I think you might see them fill up the stadium more this year just because of all of the momentum that Arkansas's built. Like I would imagine
Mhm.
that more Arkansas fans are going to travel to that game this year than maybe last year, because last year, they got off to a pretty good start, but you weren't entirely sure what the team was going to be, just
Mhm.
with I think a lot of it too depends, like I said earlier, just about how Arkansas does the first couple tests that they have. But I think A&M, like there's lots of excitement with them because they're, like I said earlier, top 10 in the preseason, and Arkansas beat them last year. So they want to obviously get back on track to, kind of controlling that series.
It had been like Groundhog's Day until that point. I mean, Arkansas's finally shown they can beat A&M. I think there are a lot of people who just quit going to that game because it's like we don't have the carpet pulled out from underneath our feet again. We've had this happen so many times in that game in Arlington. We don't want to go back and experience that. I know people firsthand who have said, who've made similar comments like that. Now maybe you see people go back to that game. So that's kind of the first 5 weeks for the Razorbacks and how their games fit within the SEC structure. We'll visit us at wholehogsports.com for all of our Razorback football coverage. It's not just football. We've got all sports that we cover. You can go to our website today. We've got a soccer recap from the Razorbacks 6-1 win at Oklahoma last night. Paul Boyd has a couple of stories on our website today. Courtney Deifel, the Razorback softball coach, got a new contract. He's got all the details. Also, he's got a preview of the Razorbacks volleyball season. They begin their season this weekend. Again, all of that is at wholehogsports.com. We'll be back late next week with our preview of the Razorbacks and Cincinnati. For Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph, I'm Matt Jones. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
The proceeding has been a production of wholehogsports.com. Look for our latest podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast store. And visit us anytime at wholehogsports.com for the latest news and commentary.